Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, April 5th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, is executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Connetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Just before we hit the airwaves here to record this podcast, word came out of the initial investigation by Israel into the strike on the World Central Kitchen food convoy coming off the Mediterranean into Gaza. And the conclusions are that the strike represented a serious violation, quote unquote, of the military's procedures and were, quote, a grave mistake stemming from a serious failure due to a mistaken identification that the convoy was carrying Hamas operatives. Apparently, this happened at night. The World Central Kitchen convoy trucks were marked on their roofs with logos that were supposed to be visible to the drones that a drone operator, obviously sitting in an office somewhere, was supposed to identify and then say, okay, it's a World Central Kitchen food convoy. We're not going to strike it. Convoy was in communication with the arm of the Israeli military that monitors and coordinates these things, and coordination broke down. And apparently, according to this report, that logo was not visible from the air at night. And so somebody thought there was a gunman, radioed it, the drone hit, others and kept firing. I only bring this up to say that here's what we're hearing. The World Central Kitchen's head, Jose Andres, says we need a full investigation. Everyone's saying there needs to be a huge investigation. They targeted the truck systematically. Israel is now targeting aid workers. Within 36 hours of this horrific event, Israel has, unless it's not either telling the truth or it's done something hurriedly and is blaming lower level people rather than higher level people, it has investigated the incident. It has identified the cause of the incident. It has laid out the series of steps that led to this disaster. Even before this happened, Israel's president apologized directly to Jose Andre, the head of the World Central Kitchen. And Israel has the chief of staff of the IDF is said to be furious. He is upset at this breakdown in discipline and order. This is a classic, the term snafu came about in World War II to describe moments just like this, where it's war, so the situation is normal and it's all effed up, and that is a snafu. This was a snafu with a tragic conclusion. And yet, Matt, as you write in a brilliant column today in the Washington Free Beacon that I commend to everybody's attention, Joe Biden, in response to this, and the administration have now, it appears, conclusively lost the plot, as your headline says, about what is going on here. Sunday, by the way, marks 6 months since October 7th. So,
well, you can start from the fact that in addition to the investigation, in addition to opening up one of the crossings from Israel into northern Gaza for more aid, the IDF has punished 3 soldiers involved in the strike on the World Central Kitchen convoy. And ask yourself, does Hamas ever punish its people when they kill innocents on purpose? And the answer is no. And so what I draw from this and from the past 6 months is the most important capacity these past months has been the ability to see clearly, to possess moral clarity. And unfortunately, that sort of moral clarity, which distinguishes between Israel, a democracy which was not at war with Hamas on October 6th, 2023, and Hamas, a theocratic terrorist mafia that has ruined the Gaza Strip since it took it over in 2007, and then committed atrocities against the civilian population of southern Israel on October 7th. That sense of moral clarity is rapidly escaping the Biden administration. And the trigger, it seems, even though this has been building for some time, was this World Central Kitchen incident. And to read the readout of the call between Biden and Netanyahu yesterday, April 4th, was to become outraged, kind of despondent at the state of things. Biden apparently went into this call saying that Israel needed to agree to a immediate ceasefire with Hamas, and that Netanyahu needed to empower his negotiators to make a deal, which is essentially a demand on the part of the United States for Israel to just do whatever Hamas says at the negotiating table, despite Hamas nuking all of the proposed truces over the past several weeks.
It needs to be said that on Wednesday,
right, 24 hours before,
Hamas rejected a deal proffered by Israel, right, which involves, we should say, we're talking about a deal. We're talking about the core negotiating offer on the part of Israel is not only a kind of momentary, ceasefire is not quite the word, but a modality to get the hostages out in exchange for the release from prison of convicted murderers, almost 1,000 of them. And we're not now talking about people who were arrested over the course of time for trying to carry out terrorist activities. Israel said, okay, we give us 40 hostages, we'll release 1,000 of your murderers. And Hamas said no. And Hamas's demand is that Israel pull out of Gaza and release all Palestinian prisoners. All Palestinian prisoners.
And Biden's response is to say to Israel, work harder on reaching a deal with these maniacs. And the second part of the readout was that he told Bibi, our policy, the United States policy, will be conditioned on Israel taking steps to not just provide humanitarian relief to the Palestinians in Gaza, which Israel has been doing, but also to avoid civilian casualties, which Israel has been trying to do, and to a degree unlike any other seen in the experience of war in human history. But that is a demand that is perhaps unachievable because the standard is so utopian. And so what this has brought me to is the sense that from the White House's perspective, Hamas is not part of the equation anymore. It is entirely about Israel conforming to the standards of the liberal celebrities who parade around as moral authorities while they are completely detached from the realities on the ground. And what that, where is the Hamas day of visibility here, right? Where can Biden see Hamas for what it is? I see you, Hamas. I see you, Hamas. And maybe when you do that, you understand what's at stake and whose side we should be on.
If he puts out that statement, though, he'll say a staffer wrote it.
Yeah. Abe.
Yes.
So we have been having this once again. We're back like the cast of No Exit or the people in the dining room in Buñuel's Exterminating Angel. We're back to the same conversation that we've been having for 6 months, which is this the turn? Is this finally the turn against Israel? And before you answer, though, I want to offer up the only devil's advocate argument that I can make against Matt and what you were likely to say, which is that Biden is calling for an immediate ceasefire. Now, if I understand ceasefires correctly, ceasefires involve both sides ceasing fire. So there's no call in here for Hamas to engage in an immediate ceasefire. The call is for Israel to engage in an immediate ceasefire, which is the language in the UN resolution that we allowed to pass. We did not veto, but we abstained on. So the devil's advocate argument is Biden and Sullivan and Blinken are playing four-dimensional chess because they're saying we call for an immediate ceasefire. And Israel can say, we're willing to have an immediate ceasefire. Indeed, it's part of whatever negotiation we can have to try to get the hostages out. And so Blinken and Biden and Sullivan know this, so that the call for an immediate ceasefire is, in fact, no change in policy, because Israel is itself at a negotiating table, effectively offering an immediate ceasefire anyway. That's about all I got in terms of, Biden's playing four-dimensional chess here and needed to say something, and he needed to placate Jose Andre for reasons that elude me. What do you have to say to that?
That's all you've got. No offense. That's not much. I think we're well into the turn, to be honest. I think the turn was the U.S. is abstaining from the UN Security Council resolution vote. Everything started sort of taking a darker, uglier turn at that moment. Regarding what's getting me now is that when we've always been talking about the difference between Biden's rhetoric and his policy, rhetoric and policy. As long as he's doing the policy, it's hard to argue that he's not on Israel's side. And I think because of the nature of Hamas's long game here, which is to get the entire world to turn against Israel in an even darker, more complete and total way, that the rhetoric becomes as damaging as the policy if it's not right. And that, to me, is sort of what has gone on here. But now, as the administration says, as Tony Blinken said with his mouth, the policy is changing anyway. At least that's the threat, that from here on out, the administration is going to adapt its policy depending on how it sees Israel comply with its demands. The demand is essentially that Israel must do what no country at war has ever done in the history of humankind, which is to not make any mistakes. If that is the red line for the Biden, for
more
Biden
than that, more than that, not just mistakes, they are to prioritize the physical and mental well-being
of the
enemy's civilian population.
Right.
Whereas at war, granted, Hamas being a totalitarian mafia, thuggish mafia, as Matt says, Hamas doesn't care about the people of Gaza. But at war, and I mean, just to be, if you've read Sun Tzu to John Keegan, breaking the will of the civilian population is part of the goal of a war.
Look,
like that is a key element of winning a war, is to break the spirit of the civilian population, not to feed it.
This has
not to lavish it with goods from abroad.
This has come up before. Biden droned an innocent family in Afghanistan, not during a war, during a pullout. He killed an innocent family, because horrible accidents, tragedies happen during war. So, I mean, you know, what's getting to me now is I recall back in October, only like a week into all this, I think it was, when there was that other hospital in Gaza, the Al Ali Arab hospital, when a missile was dropped there, and everyone said, "Oh, it's Israel," right? And then it turned out to be Islamic Jihad that did it. And I remember thinking, and I even said on the podcast, what scares me about this template for covering this war in this way is that there's going to be a horrible mistake at some point on Israel's part, and then forget about it. Because even when the mistake wasn't theirs, the world immediately decided to go crazy, turn against Israel, and now here we are.
Biden, I think it's important to say Biden was, of course, was vice president to Barack Obama. And in 2015 in Afghanistan, a U.S. Air Force AC-130 gunship blew up a hospital in Afghanistan run by Doctors Without Borders, killing 42 people and injuring 30. And yes, this is an incident that is known and remembered. Do I recall weeks, and there are going to be weeks to this, right? Do I recall weeks of coverage in the New York Times and the Washington Post and elsewhere about the war crime committed by the United States against Doctors Without Borders? No, because Barack Obama apologized. He offered compensation of $6,000 per victim. There were investigations by NATO and others that said that it was a snafu. They had gotten bad intelligence or something like that. That happened under, I mean, he wasn't president, he was vice president, but that obviously a vastly worse tragedy, if you're counting by numbers, than what happened on Tuesday to the Jose Andre food trucks. And Biden was vice president then. So I don't mean to, play games here, but take the mote out of your own eye before you start before you start talking about the mote in your friend's eye. Or this is, of course, not my Bible that I'm quoting. This parable is not my, so I may be getting it wrong, but you're supposed to take the mote out of your own eye first.
In that example you mentioned, John, I don't think that there was a Jose Andres restaurant nearby the hospital in Afghanistan. And I don't mean to be droll, but it seems to me that his involvement in this incident is one reason that it has become so important and so determinative of global politics. It's a aspect of our culture where celebrity endows someone with this moral authority and these connections to key players in the city where I work, Washington, D.C., where he is, where a brand, if it becomes involved in a situation such as this, can convey huge power. And I do think that had this not been the World Central Kitchen, we would not be where we were today. I want to say this, coming back to the theme of moral clarity, after the readout of the call between Biden and Netanyahu, and Antony Blinken, our Secretary of State, made an appearance and was talking about what was going on. And he said in the course of this appearance that if Israel does not take the steps that the United States is demanding, it would become indistinguishable from Hamas. And that sort of moral equivalence is exactly what we have to fight against. And the fact that it's coming from the Secretary of State of the United States of America is extremely disturbing. There is no equivalence between Hamas and the state of Israel. And if you fall for the global campaign that is being waged to delegitimize Israel and to separate Israel from its ally, the United States, you're worse than a schmuck.
Seth, Antony Blinken So Biden did get results last night, right? He said you got to change, you got to do things, you got to make things happen. So they've opened. Is it the Erez crossing? I'm not sure which one. They opened another crossing to facilitate more aid into Gaza. They are going to redouble their efforts in Cairo, I guess, to negotiate a deal to get the hostages out. Oh, let me just make a side note. In the Biden readout statement about how Bibi needs to take every step possible to get the hostages out and negotiate with this immediate ceasefire, there is a word missing from the statement. That word is American. There are 6 American hostages in Gaza under Hamas's thumb. We are morally responsible as a government and as a nation to do something to get those hostages home. Biden has now, what would you call it, sort of detailed Netanyahu to be the person holding moral responsibility for returning American hostages. Now, you could say that the entire American policy over the last 6 months is an implicit acknowledgement that we need to be on Israel's side in part because Hamas took American hostages. But note that Biden never talks about Hirsch Goldberg Poland, whose mother Rachel has, of course, become a kind of figure in the post October 7th universe, an American who moved with her family. Hirsch was at the music festival, got his arm blown off from what we can tell. We don't know anything about him. She is a person of great moral clarity and sort of austerity. Why doesn't Biden mention Hirsch Goldberg Poland? Why hasn't he had a public meeting with Rachel and John Poland? Where is the American role here? And Biden could say, this is one of the reasons that we're backing Israel. He doesn't say that either. So I don't mean to sort of ramble on, but so they've opened these crossings and Blinken has welcomed the move. He said just now, according to the Washington Post, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has welcomed Israel's announcement on opening further aid routes to Gaza, but said Washington will be, quote, looking closely for Israel's progress on improving aid access. Listen to this sentence. These are positive developments, but the real test is results, he said Friday at a news conference in Brussels. He said he wants to see Israel address issues including bottlenecks and delays at crossings and improve a system to deconflict and coordinate aid deliveries to ensure the safety of humanitarian workers. He said the United States would also be looking at issues including the number of aid deliveries entering Gaza, quote, on a sustained basis, and not just getting in and then getting around and the aid being distributed through Gaza, including critically northern Gaza. So now he's upping the ante here. Yesterday he said, change the policy or we'll change our policy. So Israel changed the policy. It opened a new crossing. That was a change in policy. They did so in order to facilitate aid. They're doing it to facilitate aid. They want to take this tone. They are deliberately choosing to take this tone, and that's the turn. And that's where I agree with Abe that the turn has happened, and maybe worse than Abe thinks the turn has happened, which is that this is all a predicate to saying, as Ronald Reagan said when he got tired after supporting Israel in Lebanon, and things happened in Lebanon, David has become Goliath. Like, there is a point for every American president dealing with Israel, dealing with the intractable problem it has with the Palestinians, where they say, I just can't take this anymore. I just want to go and cut a ribbon, somewhere and give a speech about National Fudge Day. That's what they want. And Israel is making that impossible because it has to fight for its own survival.
This is why democracies lose small wars, right? That's probably the title of like 17 books on the subject and all sorts of stuff. Why democracies lose small wars, right? This is the essential answer, which is that if you just drag it out, people get tired. And, I wrote recently, a couple weeks ago, about the fact that Biden's foreign policy is leaving or seems designed to leave in place frozen conflicts all over the world. So I don't know what they mean when they say deconfliction, because what I see is if you follow their and if you Ukraine, same thing in Ukraine, if you follow their advice, right? Ukraine is told not to shoot too far at Russia, right? It's like the scene in Major League where he crushes the pitch and the fan goes, it's too high to be a home run, too high. It's like you you have to let them shoot back. These are just going to freeze in place, and I don't know what deconfliction means in that regard. The other thing is that if you find yourself not being able to ask one side, one party in the negotiations to behave in good faith and as you would personally behave and expect your allies to behave, that is a sign that that other side needs to be defeated and ground into dust. Because if you're talking to Hamas and you're saying, hey, what about releasing, there's a few elderly women you have and some young children. What about some process where we can release elderly women and young children? And they keep walking away, and you realize that you can only pressure Israel. Then you understand why we're in this war to begin with, because there's a brutal enemy who is trying to kill everyone. The people it rules over, the people it doesn't rule over, the people who are coming in to help the people it rules over, the people who are coming in to help the people it doesn't rule over. So Hamas is the common denominator in all this stuff here. And I think it's true with what happened to the World Central Kitchen as well, because the one thing very few people are talking about is the fact that because of the way the aid works, Israel still, in a way, has to coordinate with Hamas. They're the people who guard warehouses and convoys in Gaza are Hamas or affiliated with Hamas. So what you keep asking Israel to do is make sure that Seth Franzman has a thread on Twitter where he talks about the fact that in order to have these aid convoys move, at some point Hamas gunmen jump on a couple trucks and follow the aid convoy because Hamas still rules Hamas ruled areas. Okay. So, and then at some point, those gunman trucks stop because the food has been dropped off at its location. And so Hamas people don't need to continue following Chef Andre's people. And after that is when 2 of the 3 strikes happened. So it was a big mistake. It was a huge mistake. However, this is going to continue being a war in which whoever's operating those drones is going to have to watch Hamas trucks with guns get into an international aid convoy and then make sure that all the Hamas gunmen have stopped off and not continued with the convoy to make sure it's not a Hamas convoy, because as long as it's surrounded by Hamas trucks, it kind of looks like a Hamas convoy. This is a recipe for disaster. You're coordinating with Hamas, you're trusting Hamas, and you're giving Hamas the legitimacy of being part of the aid process. And what happens if you're Chef Andres, you say, look, Israel was the one who struck us, so it's Israel's fault. But more than that, they're waging a war on humanity. And you totally miss the fact that, the guys driving alongside your food trucks, they're kind of waging a war on humanity too. Wouldn't you say? The Hamas who are guarding your convoy until they get to the warehouse. So the whole structure of this is completely ridiculous. And the situation and what happened with the World Central Kitchen highlights all the ways in which this is not sustainable. And yet the reaction from the world is to sustain this profile of war for as long as possible.
Even using the word deconfliction in the middle of a war, deconfliction is something that you do before a war breaks out. That's what deconfliction is. There are two countries or there are two parties or something like that that are things are getting very hot, and there's a lot of friction, and things could really blow up. So it's time to deconflict. This war has been going on for 6 months, and they're talking about deconfliction strategies and how Israel has to make a priority out of feeding the Gazans and securing the security of the Gazans when Israel has to go into Rafah. So the question is all of this just a prelude or a bluff to an explicit American demand that Israel end the war before they go in to clear out the Hamas remnant that is in Rafah?
They're asking for deconfliction as the regional conflict intensifies.
Thank you very much.
One of the kind of darkly humorous parts of the readout from the White House of Biden's call with Netanyahu yesterday were the final two sentences. After all these words saying Israel is engaged in this entirely inappropriate behavior, and we're going to condition aid, and we need to reach the Israelis need to reach a deal with Hamas right away. This readout concludes, the two leaders also discussed public Iranian threats against Israel and the Israeli people. President Biden made clear that the United States strongly supports Israel in the face of those threats. Really? All of this stemming from the Israeli strike in Syria that took out one of the highest ranked IRGC commanders earlier in the week, and Iran threatening reprisal. The Israel on a state of high alert, apparently intelligence channels very much concerned about a potential Iranian response, whether that comes by drone, missile, whether it's through proxy. And you get two sentences at the end of the statement where the entire region is set aflame by Iran. If you want to understand why Hamas struck on October 7th, it's probably because Iran saw what was happening inside Israel, saw the vacillation of the Biden administration in other parts of the world, like Ukraine, and said, this is the time to go. This is the time to attack the Zionist entity. And Iran's other proxies, whether the Houthis in Yemen or the militias in Iraq and Syria, began attacking international shipping, began attacking U.S. soldiers deployed in the region. And Hezbollah, the main Iranian proxy in Lebanon on the northern sector of Israel, began its low-intensity conflict. So if Biden wanted to display strength and display moral clarity, he would not be talking about conditioning aid or forcing a settlement with Hamas. He would be talking about the Iranian threat to global security and what the United States is prepared to do to stop it.
I'm glad you brought up the Iranian threat. Israel is very seriously taking this Iranian threat. It has suspended military leave for soldiers. It has called up the Air Force reservists. It has actually opened shelters, particularly around the Tel Aviv area, in case people to sort of prepare for the possibilities of drone strikes from Iran, which seems to be what the chatter suggests. It would represent an astonishing escalation in the Middle East conflict if Iran were to hit Israel directly using Iranian, weaponry. There have been these two sort of like probing games in the last week, two drone strikes that were very harmless from somewhere in Iraq, an Iranian proxy in Iraq on Eilat, the southernmost city in Israel.
The Iranian proxy that killed Americans in Jordan, by the way.
Right, exactly.
So Israel is taking this very seriously, and they have also scrambled GPS in the country because they're worried about imminent. That's only something you do if you're worried about imminent attacks. They've scrambled the GPS so that people who are going on dating apps are getting matched with like, Egyptians and stuff like that.
Yeah,
There's some
yeah,
funny elements to it. But the fact is that
yeah,
like I think right now, if you opened Waze in Israel, you couldn't
yeah.
use it. It would send you
No, I
to
had a friend. No, I had a friend who had called Waze. So a friend of a friend who had called Waze yesterday. It was in Israel to get to the hospital because her sister was having a baby, and Waze said that she was in Lebanon. So yeah, so this is not just to scramble GP. This is so they're doing what they can to sort of make Israel confusing and invisible using these multiple coordinates. Um, there are suggestions of Jewish sites around the globe being threatened. Israel's embassies are being emptied out. And all this with the conclusion of Ramadan, because you would never fight on Ramadan if you were Iran. It's just it's just so pious. It's so pious and supportive of the goals and aims of Ramadan, and Ramadan ends tonight. So there is this is a moment of high peril. And I will say two things about that and then ask for your response. Israel has not gone into Rafah. If you give Israel the benefit of the doubt, you would say they're not ready. They're not ready. They're still probing. They're trying to get as much intelligence as they can before they have to go into the tunnels. The tunnels are booby-trapped. They don't want to put their soldiers at risk. The other is the question of I wouldn't say a loss of nerve, but that the situation that they find themselves in, particularly with the inconstancy or the gaslighting of the Biden administration, continuing to send arms but attacking them in public, and saying it would be a mistake to go into Rafah, but saying they support the aims and goals of the war. That they're frozen, that the leadership in the war cabinet is frozen, doesn't know what to do, and is in a bit of a McClellan condition where they're standing there, everybody is waiting for the war to continue, and then other things happen, the new raid on Al-Shifa last week, and this and that stuff, other things going on. But I think there is some concern among people that they've lost the plot a little bit, and that they need to change facts on the ground and complete their mission, because all kinds of things are starting to crumble. So American support is starting to crumble. Israeli domestic politics are starting to reassert themselves in the form of mass protests that no one can quite understand the purpose of. Benny Gantz has called for elections in September. Iran is now materially involved, and all of this is okay. So that's
Well, think about it. Right now, if we were to follow the Biden policy, Hamas would remain in power and Netanyahu would fall. What kind of topsy-turvy world is that? It should be of no concern to the United States whether the Netanyahu government, how long it lasts. He's the war leader. He's leading a war cabinet, unity government. The focus should be on Hamas and its Iranian patron. And yet, this is the one thing that Biden has been pretty consistent on, is he doesn't like Netanyahu, and more figures in his party in the United States have come out to oppose him. I would say one other thing about Iran, which is the administration more and more is conforming to this view, which Mike Duran has written about at the Hudson Institute for many years, that the real goal of the Obama administration was to somehow realign the region toward Iranian power. And when you look at the sanctions waivers, when you look at the kind of the the message to Iran after the Israeli strike in Syria that, oh, we're not responsible, don't blame us, this kind of kowtow, it's hard to say that he's wrong. And just on another note that we should mention too, this might be a good time to discuss former President Trump's comments to Hugh Hewitt yesterday, where Trump said what he's been saying, though he put it a little bit more crisply.
Definitively?
Yeah,
Crisply,
yesterday, where he said, look, Israel's got to finish the job, not finish the problem, which is what he said a few weeks ago. But Israel's got to finish the job, and Israel's losing the PR war. And I have to say, I think both of those statements are true. And it's a little bit different, I think, than some of the more negative spins on Trump's position that have been forwarded by the media in recent weeks.
I would also say that this is important to understand that this is a preview. If the war expands in the north, there's not going to be any less pressure on Israel from Biden or the West to make concessions to Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies. This is what the Iranians are seeing, which is that, we ran out of patience letting Hamas, run out the clock. There's no way that Israel is given more room to maneuver in Lebanon or in the north if it comes to that. So I think there's a warning to Israel that if Hamas carried out this almost, world historically gruesome pogrom, right? All the worst, most killing of most Jews in one day since the Holocaust, and all the others, we've been through it. And Blinken has testified emotionally about what he's seen in the towns that were overrun by Hamas. If after all that, after 6 months, the position is everybody's kind of tired of this, let's just, stop and chill, then there's no enemy that the administration is going to say, stay until you beat them. There's literally no line that an enemy can cross where an ally of ours will be told by the administration, beat them until they're gone.
Okay, but this gets to the psychology of the West in the last half of the last quarter of the 20th century and the first quarter of the 21st century. Israel says we are going to fight this war to victory. The United States has not fought a war to victory since World War II. We did not fight Korea to a victory. We certainly didn't fight Vietnam to a victory. We got a minor victory in the first Gulf War with the war aim of pushing Saddam out of Kuwait, but we did not depose him, so that we had to go back 12 years later to depose him. We did not secure what you might call a victory in Iraq, even though we kind of, in the end, our war aims were satisfied and fulfilled in Iraq, despite the fact that people think that it was a terrible conflict. And we pulled out of Afghanistan. Israel is shaming, and Ukraine, by the way, is shaming the West's indecision in its warfighting. We somehow got into this place where we're not going into wars to win them. And Israel said Bibi said, and Israel was doing the same, by the way, right? Like it fought in Gaza 5 times before this conflict. And its goal wasn't, Bibi would say, we're going to get Hamas out, but nobody believed him. And then they would just, after 42 days, they would say, okay, we're done. He said, we are going to fight to victory. Zelensky says, we are going to fight to victory. And this sounds, to certain liberal ears, jingoistic, militaristic, male supremacist, all these things that are bad about the martial impulse to defend your country or save yourself.
Toxic masculinity, I think.
The ultimate in toxic, thank you, toxic masculinity. And so that's where Biden is now. And I think your point is well taken, which is Israelis all believe that there are two stages of what's going on now, right? There's Gaza, and when they finish Gaza, they're going to have to do something about the hundreds of thousands of missiles that Hezbollah has in Lebanon. The war is a two-stage war, and America's out. America is now out of this.
I want to add to Seth's excellent point. Not only is what we're seeing now, does it solidify this idea that, there's no enemy that we will sanction our allies to fight to defeat, but it also sort of reifies the idea that you want to win a war against a good, civilized country, adopt war crimes as your strategy. That means hide among civilians, use them as human shields, hide in civilian infrastructure, because we will not let anyone fight you once you do that. We will not call you out on that as a war crime. We will go after your enemy, even though they may be our ally, and you can win. So any terrorist group that wants to wage a war can win, as far as the U.S. is concerned, by adopting the Hamas strategy of war crime.
That's very deep and very terrifying.
There is, I know we spent a lot of time on Israel, importantly. So there is one piece of domestic news I think we should mention as well, which is that the group No Labels has no candidate. So for a couple years now, the No Labels effort has been trying to field a centrist ticket as an alternative to Biden and Trump. There was talk of Senator Joe Manchin, Governor Larry Hogan, most recently talk of Chris Christie leading the ticket. It now turns out that there's just no there. And so No Labels will not be a player in 2024, leaving the third-party alternatives to be RFK Jr., Cornel West, and Jill Stein, all of whom, I think it's important, primarily appeal to the crunchy left. So to the degree that they are on ballots in November, those independent candidacies would harm Biden, whereas a No Labels candidacy had the potential to also harm Trump by drawing away the Nikki Haley voters, the college-educated Republicans who are leery of voting for Trump a third time.
This is an important point also because there was such hysteria on the part of centrist liberals, anti-Trumpers, about the No Labels candidacy, because I guess they claimed they had ballot access in 17 or 18 states. Excuse me. And was a lot of focus on it, and a lot of, stalking horse for Trump and all of this. And a refusal to take the Kennedy candidacy seriously. And that clearly was an almost deranged mistake. That the No Labels appeal, if you think about who was sort of the face of No Labels, it was the late Joe Lieberman, who was the perfect example of somebody who, given a lot of things, might conceivably want to vote for Trump, obviously supported John McCain in 2008, but couldn't possibly. So a No Labels candidate was a place for a Joe Lieberman type to go, not a, so a Nikki Haley voter, as you say, not, and now Kennedy is polling around 10%. Once again, aside from everything we're talking about here about Biden's disgraceful behavior in the last 24 hours, which people, of goodwill, people who don't like Israel or don't like the war or something can agree with or disagree with, or anything like that. This is yet another data point on the in a data map that says, are Democrats really going to let Biden just walk into the nomination the way he's walked into the nomination? What do we know is going to happen when he gets nominated? There is going to be a riot in Chicago when he is nominated. He was at Radio City in New York at a fundraiser, and 500 people, I've now spoken to 5 or 6 people who went to the fundraiser, who said it was a scary scene.
Mhm.
Like people were being called kike. People were trying to push people who were walking across the street to try to get into Radio City. Like, imagine that, but there are 20,000 people or 25,000 people or something outside the convention, outside the
with
place.
Palestinian flags and kefias,
Yeah.
in trying to intimidate the convention goers. I will say Biden has received a little bit of good news in the past
polling.
24 hours in some polling. The new national poll showing him up on Trump. Again, all narrow leads. This is a toss-up election. His lead in Pennsylvania in some recent polls is widened in a 2-person race, but if you introduce the third-party candidates, it does narrow to within the margin of error. The real threat, it seems to me now, is these third-party candidates. And if they're able to obtain ballot access, it spells real trouble for Biden, especially because the foundations of the Democratic majority, the minority voters, are fracturing. And many of them, primarily Hispanics, but also African-American men, are much more receptive to either voting for Trump or not voting at all, which would also be a major threat to Biden in November.
Abe, I just want to offer you this possibility. Biden in 2022, as the war in Ukraine was about to start, and Biden said, "There's a war is going to start. I've told Putin no. The war starts." He's like, "They have to get Putin out. He's a dictator. Ukraine needs to win." And then spent a year trying to figure out how few weapons he could send, or how little. The least he could do, because he didn't want to, I don't know, international. I don't even know why, what the thinking was, that we were going to support this war and not provide the means by which the Ukrainians could win the war that we said we wanted to win. They're at stalemate. They've just lowered their draft age because they need more conscriptees to fight the war.
Raise their draft age.
Raise their draft dates. I apologize. They need more weapons. So this is likely to be in this kind of weird stalemate position as we go to the election, the Russian-Ukraine war. In Israel, we are now backing away from the idea that Israel should win this war. I don't know where things are going to be there. So he, with Israel, has displeased the Democratic left, and he will get no credit. He will get no benefit from what he has done with Israel, with the people who are not on the Democratic left, because the result, if he gets his way, will be inconclusive. Or he will have said, "I don't want Israel to win," or effectively, and then Israel will win anyway, and then he's not going to get much credit for Israel winning.
The war's going to go into his second term, and he's going to wish he didn't. He's going to say, "What did I run again for?"
Yeah,
he's signing up for 4 more years of exactly this.
Right.
Well, this is Seth's point.
Well, he might not be there for all 4 years. So
yeah,
right.
4 months. Yeah.
Oh no, about his creating this world of frozen conflicts everywhere. He doesn't have a foreign policy win. I mean, the point of foreign policy is to get things done, to change things in some identifiable way for the
create
better.
A more peaceful world.
Yeah, right.
Has that happened?
Right.
Either create a more peaceful world or face down and face off with moral clarity against the bad guys.
Right. Thus establishing deterrence and peace. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Balance. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, it may be down the road, but I mean, it's like you don't have to win everything as long as you say, we're right, they're wrong. They're evil, we're good. Mm-hmm. He was in the they're evil, we're good Hamas Israel thing.
Right.
And then they lost, as you say again, they lost the plot, and now Israel needs to feed Gaza and take care of the Gazan people.
Yeah, and don't make any mistakes, Israel.
Yeah, and opposed to us saying this, as John Fetterman, our hero of heroes, is saying, this is all on Hamas.
Right.
These two, Gaza and Hamas and Israel were at peace on October 6th. That peace was shattered on October 7th by Hamas, which is attempting to freeze Israel in place by holding hostages, including, I want to point out again, 6 Americans and a 1-year-old baby and an 86-year-old woman, and they're not the bad guys?
Oh, John, I just want to add to that point. I want to combine that with Matt's point about celebrity, because I was thinking about this, about Biden not mentioning the American hostages. You know what American hostage got? Well, not a hostage, a prisoner got a whole lot of attention at one point.
A basketball player.
Exactly. Brittany Griner.
Yeah.
This is, again, the collision of celebrity and foreign policy. Very potent mix if you're a Democrat.
And also one lesson of that, by the way, is that the whole this situation exists because of the UN's failings and connections with terrorists, right? Because you watch what's happening and you go, all right, it's very complicated to coordinate, this private kitchen and their trucks, Hamas joining them on the route along somewhere until they get to where they drop the food off, and then Hamas going this way and the food trucks going this way, and it's the middle of the night. You want to ask, why are private kitchens there at all? Like, why are we allowing people to just come up and say, hey, I have some, like, hey, it's DoorDash, I have some food for the Palestinians. It's like, okay, come on in. We'll move the drones or whatever. The reason is because there's nobody else who could do it, because the UN's failing was so massive, and they're getting in bed with terrorists, and they're co-opting by Hamas was so complete that you literally don't have international agencies you can trust to do this. You only have, you basically say, Israel's forced to say, well, we actually can trust Jose Andres more than we can trust the UN Secretary General. And that's crazy. And that's not Israel's fault either.
I just want to point out that in the game of celebrity, I want to, in 1984, when there was a whole world of publishing of parody things, like there was something called Not the New York Times, and there were parodies all over the place. And one of them was a parody of the New York Post. And it was, the front page headline was, "Kaboom, it's World War III." And the subhead was, "Michael Jackson, 80 million killed." So this is 40 years ago. So basically, like, this is a world in which, if Taylor Swift were taken hostage by Hamas, it would be Petakaris alive, Arias Suli dead. We would be, we would literally go to war over a single person. But apparently 6 American hostages, we now need to care less about them and more about making sure that Gazans eat.
Even Putin knows not to touch Tay-Tay.
There you go. Okay. So the morosity has been, we have achieved new levels of crushing morosity. So I would like to talk instead about something delightful. I last night went to see a preview of a play that is opening on Broadway. It was off Broadway 6 months ago. It's called Stereophonic. And I've never seen anything quite like it. It is a depiction, lightly fictionalized depiction of the recording of the Fleetwood Mac album Rumors. A band, unnamed band, 2 Brits, 2 Americans, both romantically involved with each other, a drummer, an engineer, and 2 engineers. And it is about this recording session that doesn't end. So, which is what happened with Rumors, and both couples broke up and they wouldn't speak to each other, and it was a nightmare and a horror. And this play, which is set in a recording studio, is one of the damnedest things I've ever seen. 'Cause it's very long because it attempts to evoke the feeling of what it would be like to be trapped in an endless world in which you just can't finish the 12 songs that you have to record your next album after your triumphant first album. There's singing. There are songs written by somebody who was the lead songwriter for Arcade Fire, plays by a writer named David Ajmi. It's, as I said, it's 3 hours long, and it's a hang. It's a little like watching Behind the Music or the Peter Jackson documentary Get Back about the Beatles, of what it's like in a recording studio. What happens when this goes on, and the interpersonal conflicts between them, with a staggeringly good cast. And it's likely to win the Tony for Best Play. It might win the Pulitzer Prize. It's interesting because it's not political. It's not political. It's not about, somebody doesn't come out of the closet. No one is trans. It's set in the mid-70s. And it is simply about the relationships, toxic and not toxic, between these, 7 people who are just trying to record an album. And it's remarkable. It can be a little boring in spots. Because it's so long, and the evocation of the length thing is that's a little too. Maybe that should have been suggested a little better at shorter length. But if you are a theater goer and you come to New York and you want to see something that is very fresh and very new, that's Stereophonic by David Ajmi at the John Golden Theater in New York. So that's the good news, is a good play that you can go see with a lot of good music and amazing acting from a cast of complete unknowns who are not going to be unknown much longer, but will be populating the streaming shows that we watch for the rest of our lives. With that, I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. I hope everybody in Israel who is listening, stays safe and is and takes heart that your cause is just and that you will prevail. We'll be back on Monday. For Abe, Matt, and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.